Hello, welcome back to GOT. I'm Mark, and today we're going to talk about processors. You know, there are so many out there. You got Snapdragon Elite chips, you have standard Snapdragon chips, and now what's new in the market is the MediaTek Dimensity chips. And they're not really new, but they're actually stepping up to flagship phones. Now, if you're like me, the question is, okay, well, which one's going to be better for gaming, or which one's going to be better for processing, or which one's going to be better for my everyday daily use and not drain the battery? Well, we're going to look at all that and more real closely, so stick around and let's geek out. Now, I've been doing smartphone videos and comparisons for a long time now, and one of the biggest questions I always get is, which one is best for which use? And we're going to talk about that and cover that. I mean, because now we've got the Dimensity chip coming up, and they're putting it in these flagship phones, and then here you got a Snapdragon Gen 5 that's not an Elite. So the big question is, do I have to have Elite to get the real performance? You know, something like in the Oppo Find N or even the Honor Magic V5, this one being the standard Elite and this one being the Elite 5. What really is the difference, and can we see that? So we're going to look at those, and as a matter of fact, they have an Elite 5 with 7 core and an Elite 5 with all 8 cores. So it's really crazy why they have these, or to think why they have these, and to understand which one is really right for you. So to better help us understand that, we're going to first start off with the benchmarks, because that's what everybody looks at as benchmarks, as if those tell you everything. Then after looking at benchmarks, we're going to actually do a practical test, or a couple of them, and then really see what the results are. And then we'll wrap it up by talking about what it all means. So starting with Geekbench, you can see here I've got everything already scored out, ran the test on each phone, and I've labeled them all. And as you can see here, the scores are different from single core to multi-core. You know, it's kind of interesting. Looking at this chart, you can see that the Honor Magic 8 Pro won in both single and multi-core. And then you have second place, the Oppo Find N6 for single core, and third core goes over to the Dimensity chip in the Vivo. And then you got fourth is last year's Snapdragon Elite chip in the Magic V5. And then the last is the new Razr Fold, fifth place in the single core. Well, what does single core do for you? Well, single core actually allows you to open things up like apps and browsers where you don't have to use a whole lot of massive power from the chips, which would be multi-core. So sometimes you might think the higher the score, better. Well, actually, in this case, the lower the score, the less battery drain. Now, can you feel a difference between a 2600 single core and a 3600 single core? Maybe barely. You know, it's going to be the speed of opening up an app or just browsing a website. You know, how much speed do you really need on those? And since they all have the same refresh rate, I'd say and challenge you that you don't really notice the difference in that single core. Now, looking at the multi-core, you can see the 8 Pro, of course, is number one again. So it's number one in both single and multi-core. And then second place now moves over to the X300 Pro with the Dimensity chip. There's quite a twist, and that's a big number, 97 versus the next one, which is 9300 on the Oppo, which is a Snapdragon 8 Elite, but it's 7 core. And then you jump to the Motorola Razr Fold, which is just over 9,000. And then last year's model, the Magic V5, is at 8,800. Now, what does this multi-core do for you? Well, it allows you to work a little faster, multitask, okay, open up several apps, get things running in the background, and then gaming, because, you know, gaming, a lot of things are going on during gaming, and quicker rendering. So when you multitask and you're doing really heavy processing, you know, the multi-cores kick in. Now, there's a byproduct of that happening, and we'll talk about that here in just a moment. But I just want to point out, looking at these scores again, who should always win in everything? It looks like the Magic 8 Pro, because it has the Snapdragon Elite Gen 5, and it scores the highest in benchmarks. And then second place should be a toss-up between the Oppo Find N6 and the Vivo X300 Pro and its Dimensity chip. And then followed by the Razr and then the V5, and they might trade off just looking at those scores. Now, I've always said benchmark don't tell the whole story. You've got to actually run processes. You've got to actually work these phones. Now, the one app that does work them out is that 3D Mark, and it does a simulated gameplay. and I do the high performance stress tests on these things. And it runs through 20 cycles, and it takes about 20 minutes to run this test. And what that does is it allows the phone to actually really process. It heats up the chip and cools down the chip, and you can see all that happening here in the results. So let's take a look at those results. So this test has 20 loops, and you can see here it has a best loop score and a lowest loop score. And we look at the Vivo real quick, you can see its best score is 7,200 and its lowest is 3,400. Okay, it has the largest gap between scores. So in other words, after these things heat up, their score drops dramatically. And then there's a score called stability here. And the stability tells you which one maintained everything the best. And that's the higher percentage. So in other words, the Vivo having that 47%, it has the lowest stability, and the Motorola has the highest stability. Now, what does the stability mean? It means you're not going to see as much change in the way it performs with heat and frame rate and consistency. So in other words, this test shows that the Motorola was the most consistent through this test. And then when we look at the stress test graph, it really kind of shows us what it's all about here, because when you look at the two elite chip phones, look at that. They drop really fast. They heat up really fast. And then you have last year's elite chip. It heated up not quite as fast. And check that out. The Motorola is more consistent, takes longer, right? It's more consistent. And you can see that the Vivo actually did heat up and then slow down pretty fast, but then it went back up. It's the only one that actually increased. So what does that mean? It means the Vivo was able to actually cool down during the process and then pump that performance back up. Now looking at the chart, it didn't stay there very long. It went right back down to its flat line. But you can see this is a 20-minute test. So if you're gaming for 20 minutes, you can see you're going to hit your peak. So looking back at this chart, you can see if we say each loop represents a minute, then the 8 Pro is going to flatline after about 5 minutes. And after about 17 minutes or 16 minutes, it's going to drop even more, because the Oppo Find N6 has 7 cores. It's able to work a little bit cooler. So it's going to drop at about 5 minutes, but it's going to be able to sustain it for the rest of the time. And then you have last year's elite chip and the Honor Magic V5 that actually it's going to take it about 7 minutes before it actually flatlines. And then check this out, the Motorola Razr Fold, it kind of stays consistent for most of it. It slowly drops off. And then, of course, the Vivo drops off, picks back up, and then it flatlines completely at about 9 minutes. So if you're playing a high-end game, you're going to find that the frame rate drops off quite a bit. Or if you are rendering video, you're going to find that these things throttle after just a few moments or a few seconds and then level off. But the Motorola has the most stability, so it will continue to perform according to these specs. Let's take a look at the rest of the performance. You can see here in battery, most of them lost about 9% of battery, during this test, but you can see that the Vivo actually lost 11% and 10% on the Motorola. So they're actually pretty consistent across the board. Now let's take a look at the temperatures. So you see the hottest one is the 8 Pro, going all the way up to 51 Celsius. And then next in line is the 49 Celsius on the other Honor Magic. And then you've got the Vivo at 45, but the lowest in temperature-wise is the Motorola. And then just below that is the frame rate, which I don't play games, so the frame rate really doesn't matter a whole lot to me. But you folks that play games, you can let me know down in the comments what's really important here. So now looking at those specs and those results, it's kind of a mixed bag. Now it's like, well, who's going to actually perform better? It's really hard to tell. So we're going to actually do a real-world test where I'm going to render a video. It's a 9-minute video. This is not going to take that long because we're going to fast through it. Plus, it doesn't take us as long to render it. And we're going to do the same one on each phone, and we're going to do it in 4K. Now, because this was difficult to hit them all at the same time, I hit what should be the slowest ones first, then went and hit the faster processors, and then went ahead and started my stopwatch. So, according to the specs, which one is supposed to finish first? But when you look at the scores here, so far you can see who's pulling ahead. The Vivo is ahead, and right behind the Vivo is the Motorola, and then the Elite chips or the Snapdragon chips are falling behind. So let's speed on up. So as you can see here, about to finish right now is the Vivo X300 Pro. It finished at 2 minutes and 11 seconds. Now looking at it, you can see that the phone right next to it is right there, right behind it. So let's speed things up until that one gets done. Okay, we're about to hit second place. Okay, and this one gets done in 2 minutes and 59 seconds. This is the Motorola Razr Fold. Again, that's an 8 Gen 5 versus a Dimensity chip. The Dimensity has beaten all the phones. We've got another one coming up. Let's speed through to it. Okay, now the next phone is the Honor Magic V5. It's the 8 Gen Elite. And, you know, I'm just telling you guys, these other two, they must be throttling. Look how far behind they are. We'll go ahead and speed up. So next up is the Oppo Find N6 with the 7-core 8 Gen Elite 5. That's crazy. So who is going to be last place but the Honor Magic 8 Pro with that 8 Gen Elite with 8 cores? So now, isn't that crazy? What did the benchmarks tell us? Not a whole lot. But from what I can see from this test, the Dimensity chip is really doing good. MediaTek did an awesome thing with this chip, and it's because it performs cooler, where the Elite chips, the Elite 5s, they run so doggone hot that they have to throttle. So in summary, Snapdragon may have the fastest chip out there, but it's not very efficient because it heats up so much this year with that Snapdragon Elite 5. So even last year's is even better. And then Motorola and Vivo have proven that a cooler phone or a cooler chip represents better performance. So if you're out there and think that you just have to have the fastest chip, well, you might be disappointed knowing that even though it's considered the fastest chip on benchmarks, that doesn't mean performance. You're going to get the best out of it. So one of the most recent phones that's going to be coming out is going to be the Vivo X Fold 6, and that phone is actually going to have the Dimensity chip 9500. So it's going to have the same chip as in the Flagship. And then we also have the Z Fold 8 that's going to come out, and it's probably going to have the Elite 5 chip in it. And I can tell you right now, it is going to throttle because I also tested the S26 Ultra and it lost to last year's Elite chip. So basically what I'm saying, don't let the Dimensity chip or these companies that don't use the Snapdragon scare you, because these chips are extremely proficient. Now I want to hear from you. Looking at these tests, were you surprised? Did anything change maybe over the last few years that you noticed in these tests? I mean, Snapdragon, were they just chasing or pursuing the fastest chip so they could beat Apple's benchmarks, you know, for speed? And then doing so, they really hurt the processor and the overall performance. Have you found any of this to be true in your life and your testing? Please share your experiences down in the comments. Now, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, you might want to do so, because I have lots of videos on smartphones, performance, and comparisons that you want to make sure not to miss, especially if you're considering to buy a new phone today and can't decide which one you want. I may already have you covered in that comparison. If you got something out of this video, do me a favor, smash that like button, because it really does help out the channel. If you're interested and have never seen a comparison video, check this one out. Until next time, have a wonderful day and God bless.